Right, all good?
Yeah. Nice.
Yes, I think we could go ahead with the talk.
Great.
So, we're here about the Endangered Languages Project, which is a joint effort among a lot of different organizations to produce a multifaceted and multimedia set of resource tools for endangered languages, and it's available at www.endangeredlanguages.com. Before we talk about the project itself, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the status of language endangerment in the world today. Subsequently, Kevin will tell about the project itself, including the history and who's involved currently, and who it's for, the audience. And then we'll go back to Anna and we talk about exactly how it works, including the catalog of endangered languages, and how users can interact with the project and provide content. And then finally, most importantly, we'll talk about how you can get involved, because the most valuable part of this project for all of us is the fact that linguists and communities worldwide can. All right, so today, an estimated 3,000 languages are spoken around the globe. Yet, according to the Endangered Languages Project, 3,400 of them, or almost 50%, are endangered, meaning that they are likely to lose their last speaker sometimes in the next couple of generations. That's a tragedy because every language is valuable, not just for the speakers of that language, but also for the scientific and historians in the world. So just how big of a problem is language loss globally? This is a huge issue that touches nearly every country in the world. Most educated people are aware of the problem of language loss to some degree, but because of the project, we can tell you concretely the true scale of this worldwide crisis. For instance, we know that languages have fewer than 10, which accounts for 1% of global linguistics. We also know that by our count, 800 languages are critically or endangered, meaning that we've lost after a single. And we also know that on average, one language every 3 months is less speaker, meaning that we need roughly 4 languages every. So it's a more complete.
Hey, can you hold on for a minute? There is some network issue. We can't hear your voice, like it's coming on and off.
Sorry.
Just 5 minutes to sort it out.
Sure.
About India, I don't know whether they're here. Just look at that. 196 and then 44%. 77.
Okay, I'm very sorry to say, I'm just switched off the Wi-Fi just to make, if some of you are using this, I just switch it off to make sure that we have the full bandwidth for this.
Turn off your video.
They actually wanted to see us while they're speaking. So.
They have seen us.
Just turn it off.
You're not moving.
Actually, only the person who is speaking can turn on the video and everybody else can.
Okay,
So everybody switch off your mobile phones. Now switch off your wireless.
it's already gone.
It's already gone. The wireless is no, there's no Wi-Fi.
I get it.
Oh, I see. You're using K.M.I. Yeah. Okay, that's what I mean. Yeah, the Wi-Fi is off.
Can you turn your video off?
Yes, I can, but I just want to try once more with the video on. So,
Okay.
okay.
So can you try again?
Sure. Do you want to start?
I mean, you can start from where you left and we'll see.
So at Language Endangered in India? Okay. So here's a more concrete example of language endangerment specifically in India. So here's the information we have in the Endangered Languages Project. We have information about 196 endangered languages in India. And the usual estimate for the total number of languages in India is around 400. So that means roughly 44% of languages are endangered. And this actually represents the global rate of endangerment as well. So India is a typical case. So furthermore, in the catalog, 77 languages have fewer than 5,000 speakers, and another 21 have fewer than 300. So those are languages that we actually know something about in the catalog. We also have 3 languages purportedly located in India that we have almost no information about at all. We know the names of these languages shown on the slide, but we don't even have a location or a speaker number. So if you know anything about any endangered languages in India or throughout the world, please contact us via the email address or talk to our regional directors for this region, who are Greg Anderson. So India is actually this country where linguistic diversity is threatened. Here and elsewhere, we could lose half of the world's diversity if we just sit and wait. And so at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Kevin, who will tell us how language communities are responding to this issue and the role ELKL plays, or Endangered Language Project plays.
Thank you, Bryn and Anna, and thank you for taking time out to listen to our presentation. I want you to look at the slide that's in front of you, and I guess notice that there are a range of activities being represented in those slides or in those photographs. And most of those images, of course, are ones that you would be very familiar with. There are a range of activities that are being undertaken by communities, I guess, throughout the world to varying degrees, as communities which are representative from minority languages are trying to preserve and maintain their languages. Each, I guess, the activities demonstrate an action or a range of things that communities have been looking to undertake to preserve language. And the ELP project, the Endangered Languages Program, has tried to facilitate access to as wide a range of communities and community actions as possible. I guess the photographs represent a snapshot into the real-world activities of communities and language workers throughout the world. The task of the Endangered Languages Project has been to marry up what has been a very extensive scientific activity in the development of the ELKL database, one I'm sure that you're either familiar with or certainly will know something about, which has been undertaken over a fair amount of time and brought together resources for over 3,000 Indigenous endangered languages. And marrying that material with, I guess, the activities of language advocates, people like myself and the communities throughout the world who are sort of wanting to do as much as they can to revive and maintain their languages. Like structurally and conceptually, ELP has centred itself around this data as being the sort of the core material, which has provided the mechanisms for us to then attach a whole range of materials that have been given to ELP to represent the activities of language workers throughout the world. The site evidences, I guess, an enormous amount of collaboration. Certainly, the activities of linguists like yourself, language teachers, community advocates, learners of language, community people who are interested in being able to read what's happening in their languages, have gone to the site and used the materials that have been placed on it. We know, of course, that many communities are working on revitalisation of their languages. We know that, for instance, there are a range of activities, including master apprentice programs, the development of language nests and immersion programs, language archiving and documentation, as but some of the examples of what's been happening around the world. We know, of course, that there are many school-based programs where people are trying to work back into the schools and to work with their students and to, I guess, demonstrate the efficacy of the language and its capacity to give them the sort of tools to move into the 21st century. ELP brings facilities of technology to the global online network. So it's basically, what something that ELP is the being and end all. It is one activity which is based itself around technology and the internet and the ELKL database, and being able to sort of find a way to garner a whole range of resources around those materials. It's a way of being able to develop and share resources and to network across the globe. The site connects language champions in communities involved in like work, so that people who are either teaching and learning, who are doing archiving, who are doing documentation, all wanting to use, you know, modern 21st century social media as a means to teach language, and being able to find resources on the website and connect with other people. Next slide. The next slide is, I guess, a snapshot of what the front page of the ELP website looks like. So when you come to the first front page, you come to a map which you can turn into quite an interactive map, and below that are a range of 8 coloured buckets, if you like. And these buckets represent, I guess, the total of our thinking at the time in terms of the sort of range of work that people are working in. So if you look at those buckets, you can find behind it, and I'm not going to do this now, but Anna and Bryn will sort of demonstrate this in more detail later on, that behind these buckets are an enormous amount and a growing amount of material that's been placed in there by language advocates, you know, throughout the world. I guess they represent the 8 areas that we thought represented these sort of significant activities. So they go to the heart of language research, language revitalisation in its broadest sense, language materials, the sort of the materials that have been that people are producing, everything to do with language education in terms of programming and resources that can demonstrate how to teach language. Language advocacy, certainly there's an increasing amount of work being undertaken across the globe as minority languages are increasingly trying to place pressure on governments to give their languages, you know, a greater degree of access into schools and into the wider community. Art and cultures, technology and the media round that out. So you can see that these sort of very large global buckets represent sort of significant activity. The ELKL database is not one of those buckets, but in fact sits above it and throughout it. So it's in a sense viewed everything that gets lodged into the website, whether it be teaching resources, whether it be a YouTube clip or whatever, is linked to a particular entity within ELKL. So the ELKL database is a discrete element within the website. It can be searched as a discrete element, and there's a range of materials that Anna, I know, will go through with you in some detail. What we want to say is that these buckets represent sort of the real community advocacy research activity. Certainly this is what our research told us, is that people wanted to have access to this material. They understood ELKL, they understood its significance, but they wanted to be able to share the resources that they were developing and see what other people were doing. So I guess that these are questions which we're going to talk in more detail later on. The following slide, I guess, represents, I guess, the front page to the website. What we want us to say is that ELP, you know, was launched not that long ago, only in June 2012, and there's been an extraordinary amount of activity since 2012 in what's gone on behind this. The project itself, of course, started before that. It was an initial grant of money that came to, I think, Eastern Michigan University and University of Hawaii at Manoa. And then Google all came in at a later point and provided some resources, a significant amount of resources, to develop a robust website that the ELKL material could sit in. As it was originally conceived, it was going to be a sort of a portal to the ELKL material. But very quickly, of course, the question got asked, what purpose does it have if all it is a database about scientific documentation? Where is the community behind this? And of course, both universities who have got significant traction in terms of sociolinguistic interaction with communities, both understood the importance of being able to have significant community input into the project. And so the project morphed quite significantly after that initial resource money became available. The first People's Cultural Council in Victoria, in British Columbia in Canada, came on board as a representative of community organisations, and those three organisations with Google then worked on the development of the website. Behind, I guess, the ELP, if you're looking at sort of high-end goals, they represent, I guess there's 6 of them. One is to actually build a network of language champions, and we understand that this is a global activity that brings together a range of people. You yourself are, in fact, both probably language users of some of these minority languages, language researchers, and probably language advocates and champions of those languages. So you're part of this. We want to bring you into it. A second area of ELP activity is around advocacy and understanding that languages find it very difficult to survive without having strong advocacy and being able to draw on the resources from worldwide. We want to build stronger links with political and social organisations, our Indigenous representatives, wherever they might be, and give them the background that they need to understand about the importance of language reclamation. We want to strengthen links between ourselves and the university and the research area. We understand that the critical importance of ongoing research in our languages to try to bring some of our languages which are critically endangered back to a point where communities can access them again. We're about to share and locate tools that are being developed, constantly being developed, and we want to be able to use and tell people about it through the website. And of course to situate the catalogue of endangered languages. So there's 6 primary goals of ELP. Very quickly then, I guess the question is, who is ELP? And this slide gives you some sense of what it is. Let me say to you that everybody other than, I think, one person in the office at the People's Cultural Council in Victoria in Canada is unpaid in terms of ELP activity. So it's purely a voluntary organisation where people have come together to give their time up. Once we've expended our resources that we had from Google, we need to actually be able to maintain the website. But the website is run by the Governance Council, which is a representative council of people who have demonstrated long-term commitment around language reclamation and interest in being involved in this particular project. Underneath that, there's a range of advisory committees. I don't want to say too much about them, other than obviously the names to give you a pretty good indication of what they are. The technical committee basically represents all the work to do with the ongoing maintenance and development of the website. The outreach committee has the task of basically trying to outreach to users and also researchers to bring resources into the project and to let people know what's going on. Behind it is a very small executive committee of about 3 people, which in a sense facilitate activity in between when the governance committee meets. And as I said, an executive support of 1 person who does the activities of keeping us all linked in together. In terms of where membership comes from, the map gives you some indication of where people are placed. And as you can see, look, it isn't global by any stretch of the imagination. Having said that, ELP is very cognizant of that and is wanting to expand its membership. But I guess it demonstrates, in terms of commitment to the governance committee, there are a number of dot points, a number of issues that were raised as being critical to membership. Really, they come down to a demonstrated commitment, having a capacity to outreach to other organisations and individuals to tell people what's going on and participate, support the contributions of new content, to support the integration of tools, to support the efforts of endangered languages and funding, and just be committed to excellence in governance. It is difficult to try to pull a truly global organisation together and basically only be able to use, either Skype or Google Hangout as a way to meet and to progress the activity. The fact that we have such a wonderful, robust website gives you some indication of the work that's been done by so few people. As you can see, currently the governance committee draws primarily from North America, from Australia and Oceania, and we want to extend that activity. You know, certainly we want to extend into South America, into Africa, into Asia, into Europe, and certainly into the Indian subcontinent. We realise that, you know, we're just scratching the surface, and that there's so much work being undertaken, and we need to be able to engage with a range of locations to really get a sense that we are a global organisation trying to meet the needs of global communities. So on this last slide of mine, I'm just going to talk a little bit about halfway down it, and then I'm going to pass back over to Bryn, or Anna, I'm not sure which, to continue on. But I guess, so the question you might ask is, so who is the website for? And I hope that you've got some sense of that from seeing the initial upfront screen to the website, and see that we're really trying to draw in both the scientific activity of linguists and the very much the sort of utilitarian work of community advocates around the world as they are developing and struggling to try to develop resources to make their languages vibrant and learnt again. So, you know, we want a structure that spans both the sort of the community activities, but also the technical aspects of the website. You know, we really are about advocacy, and we understand that often linguists, you know, are a prime group of people who work with their communities behind the scene, who are advocating on behalf of their communities, who often come from those communities and have a strong sense of what the needs are and what the sort of the range, the work that needs to be done into the future. You know, we want to tap into learners, you know, both the casual learners and the dedicated learners of language, and be able to demonstrate that the site, you know, has a way to reach all of those people. We understand that we need to meet the diverse needs of communities. You know, the work of communities, it sounds a very sexy thing and it sounds like it's been done by everybody, but we know, of course, that often language work is done by small groups of people around the kitchen table, around the school table, and late in the afternoon, on weekends, meeting in small groups. Language reclamation and maintenance is not sexy in many communities, especially in communities that have a range of other issues and concerns. And language is just but one of the issues that they need to work with. And so we want to basically provide them with the tools and the way to tap into at least some of the materials that other people are doing. So I hope that gives you some sense of who's it. I'm now going to pass that back to Anna and to Bryn to finish off this slide and to continue on.
All right. Thank you so much, Kevin, for that wonderful overview of the many purposes and audiences we hope ELP will serve. I'm going to zoom back in a little bit to the academic part of the website, since I assume some of you there are academic linguists and may be interested in the details of that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about ELP and LCAT's uses for academic linguists, anthropologists, sociologists, and obviously students within those groups. So the catalog of endangered languages itself, like Kevin said, is sort of the core organizing principle of the site. And you'll notice that when you visit the site and you click on any of the dots on the map and go to a language page, you'll see information there like language names, numbers of speakers, endangerment ratings, and so forth. All of that data that you're seeing on those pages is LCAT itself. That is the catalog of endangered languages. So it's nestled right in the middle of every page about each language. So what is LCAT in a broad sense? As Kevin said, it's a joint project between the University of Hawaii at Manoa and Eastern Michigan University's Department of Linguistics. And our overarching goal with LCAT is to collect and share the most accurate, up-to-date information possible on the vitality of each and every language, endangered language in the entire world. No mean feat, but we've gotten 3,200 languages deep, so we're making good progress. The real question for most academics is, why do we need LCAT, right? We already have other databases of language information out there. We have a lot of individual descriptions of particular languages, so why do we need this big, overarching, consolidated catalog? And why do we need a new one? Well, one of the main benefits that LCAT offers its audience is the fact that it's a consolidated source of information. In the past, if you wanted to find out vitality information for a specific language or group of languages, you would generally need to search out information from a lot of different sources. You might need to acquire out-of-print publications, go through paywalls for journal subscriptions, or reach out personally to linguists or community members who have that knowledge. But our goal is to do all that legwork for you, right? We don't want you having to purchase out-of-print books or pay for journal subscriptions if you just need to know about the vitality of a language. So our goal is to consolidate all of the information that has been published and that has been submitted to us for each language, and present all of that information side by side, right? As many of you know, when linguists go seeking information on the vitality of a language, you'll often find a lot of conflicting reports. One scholar might say there are 3,000 speakers, another might say that there are 5,500. Our job at ELKAT is not necessarily to decide who's right, because we don't have the time or the resources or the personnel to go visit each and every endangered language community. So what we do is present all of the available information side by side so that users can get an idea of the range of opinions and who is presenting them. All of our data is clearly cited, and we like to give the full range of information to users. But another really important part of our project is active outreach to people who have better data than what is published, right? For many endangered languages, the pace of publication can be very slow or non-existent. There simply aren't enough linguists to produce publications on the vitality of every language on a timely manner. So one of our main tasks is to actively reach out to people on the ground who have good first-hand knowledge about language situations. Communities, scholars, and the public are all able to contribute data to the catalog by submitting it through the website. We'll talk a little bit in a minute about how you can do that if you have information about an endangered language. And finally, another of ELKAT's major purposes is to provide robust and comparable assessments of levels of language endangerment across the globe. With Bryn's introduction, she generously shared some of the statistics we've gathered from doing this sort of in-depth research on 3,000 endangered languages. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the way we assess language vitality for the catalog, because as you'll notice, when you look at any language, you'll see a color-coded vitality rating. So, as Kevin said, the catalog of endangered languages, like ELP, aims to serve the overlap of needs and interests between academic linguists and language communities. You know, obviously academic linguists have things that only interest them. Not everybody needs to know theoretical morphology. But we do share a lot of interests with language speakers and communities, such as obviously the protection of linguistic diversity. That's hugely important to our field, right? Michael Krause's famous quote about us obliviously presiding over the disappearance of our subject matter. We are very interested in using this data to protect global linguistic diversity. We're also obviously interested in the promotion of language rights. Linguists tend to be highly invested in making sure people can use language in the ways that are comfortable for them. Everyone involved in the endangered language picture is invested in high-quality documentation. One of our major goals is to highlight where documentation is most urgently needed and encourage people to go do good, high-quality language documentation, and then obviously to make that information available where it is appropriate. There has been some discourse about the problem of data hoarding within documentary linguistics, right? People will go out, do field surveys, get an idea of what's happening in a language situation, but not have an easy way to disseminate that information. And ELKAT hopes to provide a place where that information can be easily and freely disseminated. We don't charge. And finally, ELKAT aims to join with ELP in raising global awareness of language endangerment. An informed public is a public more likely to get involved in language preservation. So we very much share the goal of raising awareness and raising activism in language issues. So as Kevin discussed, ELKAT sort of sits in the middle of ELP, and this slide is meant to provide an overview of just some of the sort of resources you might find linked to a language. So for example, the Koda language, which is primarily spoken in Bangladesh, it has information of metalinguistic content available, so language codes in the ISO 639-3 standards, an assessment of language endangerment, a number of speakers, and location on a map. But in addition to that, we have materials like video recordings of speakers and items in the media regarding endangered languages. And all of those are tied back to the Koda language page itself. A little bit more about the process for gathering ELKAT's data. We get the question a lot, what languages are included in ELKAT, and how do we decide, right? Our short answer is all endangered languages are included in ELKAT. And that, of course, begs many follow-up questions like what does endangered mean and what counts as endangered? I'll talk a little bit more about our inclusion policy. The language dialect issue, I feel like we need to clarify also. A lot of people will get a little annoyed that they don't see their endangered dialect represented on the site. But in cases where a dialect of a language, but not the language broadly, is under threat, we generally err on the side of just focusing on languages. However, there are obviously so many cases where the language-dialect boundary is fuzzy that when there are conflicting opinions, we err on the side of inclusion. So for example, the example you're seeing here under language metadata is a public comment on the data page for this language of Namibia that I will not attempt to pronounce the clicks for. It is by some considered a distinct language and by others considered a dialect of another language. So what we do is we represent it in ELKAT, but with a note saying this may in fact be a dialect. A little bit more about where we get our information. I wasn't kidding when I said that when you want information about endangered languages, you have to dig deep. We get information from every conceivable source that's out there. If it has ever been published, we aim to incorporate it into ELKAT if it's relevant to language vitality. So obviously we pull a lot of data from journal articles, books, grant applications, ISO code requests, project reports, and direct communication, most importantly, with communities and scholars. User feedback from the ELP site is a really crucial part of where we get our data. Obviously, publications can be out of date, they can be inaccurate, and so our real goal is to have everyone involved in the endangered languages issue contact us if they see something that could be improved upon. A little bit more about what you'll see when you look at the language data on the ELP site. You'll notice that up at the top, above the data for each language, you'll see a citation. And next to those citations will be arrows. And that is how you view the data from multiple sources that are presented here. Right? So if you click the arrow to scroll to the side, instead of this figure of 100,300 Burushaski speakers, you will get our other source, the Burushaski, which claims that there are fewer than 90,000 speakers. And this is useful because the 100,000 figure was submitted in 2014, whereas the 90,000 speakers figure was submitted in 1990. So users might be able, from that, to extrapolate an idea of either how research on the language has progressed or how the speaker population has begun to grow again. It's also possible to compare all of the sources we have on a language by clicking the book icon in the upper right-hand corner. You'll see, I don't know if it's too small to read, but the text there says compare sources, and then in parentheses it says 9, which indicates that we have 9 separate publications dealing with the vitality of Burushaski. A little bit more about what's actually in ELKAT. We aim to collect all data that's pertinent to a language's vitality and sociolinguistic context. So obviously, when dealing with language endangerment, speaker numbers are the sort of data a lot of people reach for. So we do collect the number, age, and proficiency of speakers where that information is available. We have fields that account for things like second language speakers, elderly speakers, child speakers, and so forth, because the demographics of a speaker population can be very important. We also note the locations of speaker communities, the domains of use of the language, attitudes that the speakers hold towards the language, other languages used in multilingual contexts, whether the language has any legal or official status, or whether it's receiving some sort of support from an institution, like a university or a nonprofit. And then we note any special endangerment factors. For example, many of the languages of Micronesia spoken on low atoll islands are currently threatened not because of a disruption in language transmission, but because of a disruption of the population's home due to rising sea levels. And obviously, when people have to go into the diaspora, that can severely affect language transmission. And finally, we just collect general metadata about the language, things useful for organizing and cataloging this sort of information, such as alternate names of the language, language codes, its classification, and any dialects it may have. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the Language Endangerment Index. It's the metric we use to assess language vitality for the catalog of endangered languages. And this is fortuitous timing, actually, because our first publication on the Language Endangerment Index just came out last week. So if you'd like to read it, it's in the Journal of Language and Society. But the goal of LEI is for LCAT to have the ability to assess vitality in ways that are accurate and comparable across languages. And when I say comparable, it seems like it might be sort of comparing apples to oranges, compare two endangerment scenarios, right? Things as socially complex as language shift are tough to reduce to numbers, but sometimes numbers are needed. And the goal of the LEI is to make comparable two situations like these here. So Ambedkar in Australia is spoken in an English-dominant context with a colonial history. There's good knowledge of the speaker community. They are very active in language maintenance. And so we have a lot of data there, right? We know a lot about the situation of this language. We know enough to assess it as being vulnerable, and we have enough data that would give it a 100% certainty rating, that assessment. A case like Sentinelese, on the other hand, spoken in the Sentinel Islands, is an entirely different context, right? Both endangered languages, but completely different situations. So I'm sure most of you know this language is spoken on an island by a population that has not been contacted by outsiders. No one is really sure how many people live there or speak the language. And so with Sentinelese, based on nothing but a very rough estimate of the population, we end up with an assessment of severely endangered, but only with 20% certainty. And I'll talk a little bit more about what certainty ratings mean. So for the vast majority of endangered languages on Earth, very, very little data is available to researchers, right? There are 3,000 some odd endangered languages. The vast majority of them we know very little about. And so the LEI needed to be able to account for the vitality of languages about which we know almost nothing. So the LEI is lay, of course, we had to make it Hawaiian. It is a 4-factor model which produces endangerment ratings that can be meaningfully compared across languages, we think. And its real strength is that it works with whatever data is available, no matter how little data that is. And it self-assesses not only the rating, but the rating certainty level, so how much information that rating was based on. So the LEI, when assessing endangerment, looks at 4 primary factors. This LEI was designed during a workshop of documentary linguists trying to come to an agreement about a model for endangerment assessment that would apply in most global scenarios. So we picked 4 factors to go with. One is the total number of fluent speakers, right? Obviously, it matters whether a language has 100 speakers or 100,000 speakers. That makes a difference. And then we look at intergenerational transmission, whether the language is being passed on to children currently. And because that is agreed upon by most linguists to be such a crucial part of the endangerment picture, we weight that twice as heavily as the other factors in our assessment. So intergenerational transmission score is worth 2 times as much as any of the other scores in the algorithm. And finally, we rate the language for its domains of use, whether it's broadly used in most social spheres or restricted to a few ceremonial situations. And then we look at trends in the number of speakers. So is the speaker population remaining roughly stable? Is it declining slowly, or is it declining quickly? So when information on each of these factors is available, the LEI gives it a rating, a numerical rating, and the certainty, again, is assessed based on how many of those factors we had information about. And it produces an overall endangerment rating from level 1, which is vulnerable, the least endangered, that's the good news rating, to level 5, critically endangered, which is the most severe endangerment scenario. In addition to endangerment levels, we also include languages in the categories dormant and awakening. A little bit on what we mean by those terms. Dormant languages are those which might otherwise be called extinct or dead or other highly unpleasant terms. We've chosen dormant to represent the concept that these languages can be revived with a lot of hard work. They're not dead, they simply need to be awakened from their sleep. Dormant languages in the catalog do not include all languages that have ever been known to have ceased being spoken. Right? We don't have Latin in there as a dormant language, because there are fluent speakers of Latin, actually. But dormant languages are those which have lost their final speakers in the last half century or so. And we don't have very good data on languages which were lost before the 1960s. So that's where we put our cutoff point. And then we include also awakening languages, which is languages that have lost their last native speakers but are currently engaged in revival efforts to create new speakers. So what are some of the applications of LCAT beyond just giving us important statistical pictures of global language endangerment? Well, obviously, one of our main goals for LCAT, as Kevin discussed, is to aid revitalization and conservation efforts, right? You cannot make a good treatment plan without an accurate diagnosis. You cannot design a good language revitalization program without having solid data about the language's current state of vitality. And so our goal is to provide accurate data that is actionable so that communities can use it to make good, well-informed plans for language maintenance or revival. Another of the applications we envisioned was for funding and policy purposes. So there are very few linguists and very few language workers in the world, and even less money for them to go do their work. And so funders will often try to consult catalogs or other quantitative measures in order to triage their very limited resources. And it's obviously always a terrible choice to have to choose between communities who want to do language documentation and revitalization work. But our goal is that, armed with the best possible information, funders can make well-informed choices about where to allocate their resources, and policymakers can similarly make well-informed choices about policy. We've actually had a lot of success with communities using LCAT to support their applications for funding. For example, we had a language community in Australia contact us recently, and they requested that we actually change the status of their language from severely endangered to dormant, as they had lost their last speaker. But due to their change in status to a dormant language, they were successfully able to apply for funding for language revival for communities who had lost their last speaker. So LCAT actually directly aided them in securing the resources they needed to do language work. Another application of LCAT, obviously, is to raise awareness by getting an accurate measure on the scale of global language endangerment and providing corrective statistics like one language is lost every 4 months. You may have heard the language dies every 2 weeks thing. We can now tell you, thankfully, it's not quite that dire, but a language every 4 months is still horrible and unacceptable. And we hope that raising public awareness of the scope of this problem will help not only get the public involved, but perhaps even divert a little bit of financial resources to our cause. And finally, we hope that LCAT can be used for knowledge sharing and community building. And I'll walk you through a few possible applications of LCAT at the end of this presentation. But one of our goals is to enable language communities to find other people who are in similar endangerment contexts. A lot of communities benefit enormously from connecting with other groups who are in a similar situation and sharing best practices and revival tips. So I'm going to turn it over to Bryn to talk a little bit more about the interaction of LCAT and ELP.
Great, thanks. That was about the Endangered Languages Catalog, which of course has really great and important metalinguistic, sociolinguistic, and demographic information about these endangered languages. But our project is about more than just that. The Endangered Languages Project also contains a wealth of other kinds of information, which includes videos of endangered languages and cultural practices, audio recordings, documents, links, user comments, and suggestions. So ELP doesn't just tell you that a language is endangered. Our goal is to actually provide a place where communities can share information in and about their language to accomplish their own goals, which are most often centered around language teaching and language revitalization. So to that end, we wanted to share with you some exciting news, at least from our perspective. We're very excited that in April of last year, 2015, we were able to relaunch the website with improved design, which came with a couple of features we're excited about. First of all, we have new and improved browsing. We've added this browse by category feature, which Kevin showed us at the beginning of the presentation with the buckets and the specific categories for types of information. So if you're interested in resources about language education, you can filter your search to such fine-grained topics as curriculum design or immersion and language nest resources. You can also browse resources by their format. Are you looking for an audio sample or a video or an image or a document? And you can choose to view resources by what's been the most recently added or what's the most viewed. And currently our resources include information on anthropology, sociology, education, cognitive science, environmental science, public policy, and more. And these things have all been uploaded by users and, as well as researchers who use our website. We also have, one of the great improvements we have was to make the Endangered Languages Project website available in more languages. So we have translations for at least the main page and some important meta information. Most importantly, I think we improved the process for submitting materials. With the new submission process, you can add resources by category and tag resources so that they can be easily searched. So you can choose from existing tags that we have, like language advocacy or language teaching materials, or you can create your own tags. And so I'll show a little bit of this process on the next slides. So to interact with ELP, users create an account. You can do that on the main page there. Once you have created an account, the user can contribute to the website. So one way to contribute is by clicking on the Submit button in the toolbar, which is shown here. We have the submission process is broken into several small parts. First and foremost, we ask the user to identify the type of resource being submitted, so users can submit videos and audio for the language or cultural practices. They can submit documents via Google Docs, which are quite often things like word lists, dictionaries, language guides, and instructional materials. And then this final category link is for basically anything else as long as there's a link to it on the internet. So our users most often use this to share links to news stories or links to websites for specific language projects. So once a user has gone through all the steps and submitted their materials, their resources on some language, this is the kind of stuff that we get out of that. We get things like instructional materials, which are really valuable for these language communities. You see here, this TPR number song is a video you can watch and learn how to count in this language. We have a poster of Hong Kong Sign Language illustrating some basic signs. Users have also used our website to share really important cultural information depicting traditional practices like traditional food making and dancing and making of tools and instruments. So beyond that, users can also interact with ELP by suggesting improvements to its content, and there's a couple ways to do this. The first is to make suggestions about information in the actual LCAT database itself, which is the part of ELP that is the most strictly curated. This is the actual language information. We take care of it. But quite often our users do know about a more recent publication or have more updated information than we have, so that they are able to make suggestions and provide that information to us. That information goes to graduate students like me and Anna, and we research it, we consult with our regional experts and people on the ground throughout the world. And based on all this information, we add the best possible and newest, most updated info about these endangered languages to our website. So this is an important way that users can contribute, but they can't edit LCAT directly. It's not like Wikipedia, which anyone can edit. We gather the best information from all these different sources and tightly curate it, but we do take user suggestions very seriously. We thoroughly research each one, and we've gotten a lot of really good information like that. Another way that users are able to interact with the website is through commenting. They can actually comment on any individual language page. Kind of the same way that you can comment on a news article. Most of the time, when people do comment on our language pages, it's encouraging comments or people really excited to see their language represented. They say things like, "This is my language and we should take care not to lose it." Sometimes there's discussions about the language or about funding opportunities. This content is not moderated by us for the most part. It's moderated by users. They can upvote the sorts of comments that they really enjoyed seeing, downvote anything else. And the comments that users leave here on the website also tend to improve LCAT content, and they give us ideas for future website redesigns. And finally, users also help us by curating any of the user-submitted content. So they can actually rate the kind of resources that other users have submitted, and they can they can also flag it as inappropriate. If an item is flagged as inappropriate, it comes off the website immediately pending moderation, but almost in every single instance, it's basically been that it was a video submitted to the wrong language, and what happened was a user flagged it, we found out about it, and we moved it to the correct language. And so we believe that this is the best way to approach a community-driven resource like ELP. So it's important that users be free to submit whatever resources they consider important about their language. But it's also important that we have a means of keeping the content relevant and appropriate. And we've been successful at this so far, I believe. So at this point, I'm going to turn it back to Kevin to wrap some things up.
Thank you, Bryn. I guess both Anna and Bryn have given us a really good appreciation of the activities behind the ELKL database and I guess the influence it has over the structure of the whole interaction and the whole sort of user interface that people are able to see. I want to come back now and just sort of try to pull things together and, in a sense, get us to a point where maybe you can interact with us and ask some questions or have some discussion which we can listen into. The first thing, I guess, is to understand that ELP is not a static, as an organisation, it's not a static organisation at all. There is constant movement, and we're certainly, as I indicated at the beginning, looking to broaden our focus beyond what was unintended, but it was the initial sort of construction of ELP as being a sort of a Northern Hemisphere and essentially a Northern American sort of organisation to one which is truly representative of Indigenous activities and language work across the world. We're certainly, through our outreach committee, looking to broaden our geographic scope, and these aren't in any particular order, but we're certainly mindful that we need to have a real sense of what's happening in the African continent and the enormous amount of activity that's occurring across those countries. China is another one which we are starting to get some small amount of traction in, and looking to what, and I guess from China, working inland, of course, right through into Central Asia. Our own area, of course, India and Southeast Asia, of course, is a huge area which has hardly been tapped into, and we're looking for opportunities like today to open up that discussion with you and to look at ways of being able to draw you into how ELP could better represent the work that you're doing and the communities that you're serving. I guess the second area, of course, is the notion of growing the website, and as Anna and Bryn have really well laid out to you, this is the second major iteration of the website, but we're of course mindful that there is further work to be done, and we're constantly looking at ways which we can improve the website, given that we are very short in resources, and therefore we need to actually crimp our aspirations to the resources we have. But certainly we're looking to increase the material we've got about languages and to continue that scientific work, which is very ably done through the ELKL project. We want to certainly grow the materials that communities are placing on the website to make it relevant to what people want to know about, given that it's not meant to be the total sum total of everything that a language group is doing, but a sense of a range of activities that they're doing and they're prepared to share. Given that this is a sharing environment, it's very difficult to put materials up here which you don't want to share. So we have that as a caveat on the materials that really you shouldn't place them up here if you don't want other people to look at them. Certainly we want to be seen as an organisation which is proactive in the space of language work. I mean, to me, and I've had many discussions with others, but language work for minority languages is a very political process, and the politics of language reclamation and maintenance means that anybody working in this space needs to be mindful that a website like this, while it might appear to be glossy and whatever, sitting behind it is the social, political aspirations of hundreds of thousands of people working with their languages, and with your support trying to protect them and to try to improve access to them. We're obviously very keen to ensure usability, and we're constantly looking at ways to better that experience. So if you've got suggestions, we really are open to any of those suggestions that you might have We want to increase the traffic on the site, so we're constantly looking at who's using the material, where it's coming from, and currently well over 60% of the traffic through the ELP website comes from North America. We would like to see that to be extended to be a better representative of the huge amount of work that's happening across the globe. Another area, of course, we're very interested is in translations. While we've had some major improvement on the second iteration of the website, so we now have other major languages coming on board in terms of being able to access the first entry level. That's an ongoing process, one which we want to improve and continue. And I guess the third area is our ever-increasing sort of activity in the social media space, and trying to look for ways to get much more instantaneous news out to communities, letting people know what's happening, to be aware of programs. The Mother Tongue Language project was, came up last week. It was tweeted around the world. People come on board and put materials up using sort of not the website, but using the Twitter account and the Facebook account as a way to just be able to do something instantaneous and say, yeah, I'm out here, I'm doing stuff. So, using it to inform and to network is very important. So in terms of finishing up, we would really want to see that this project is a project in progress, and it's a never-ending progression of activity. And we would hate to think that people would say, yep, all that's up there, ELCAT's in there, thank goodness for that, tick, move on. But in fact now ELCAT is, and the work it links to in terms of ELP, is now tapping into the unlimited amount of work that's happening in terms of we want to see happen and encourage to happen in language maintenance around the world. So really, we would love you personally to be able to contribute to the ELCAT data. I mean, before we came online, we looked at your bios and looked at the enormous amount of credibility that you guys have, and are mindful that you are sitting on and working with communities and have produced an enormous amount of material that would be of invaluable use to, for your communities and other communities. To be able to reach out through yourself, through to the regional language facilitators of ELCAT, and to be able to have a dialogue with them, an ongoing dialogue about how we can improve what's going on. Obviously, we want to really improve our materials on facilitation of language learning. Second language acquisition is an area of ongoing research, and while your work may be in linguistics, I'm sure most of you have also done, most of the linguists I know, also get involved in community language teaching and get involved in resource development and a whole range. And while it's probably maybe not your particular penchant, it's certainly one that I know that you're actively engaged in, and so that material is invaluable to others as well. And of course, translations of material. So I just want to sort of, tie up by just sort of saying, that the ELP as a resource, is strongly linked to very strong scientific information. We had a lot of tussles around that, so that in the end, the ELCAT database didn't swamp the rest of the material. And I think we've found a really interesting synergy between what has been, an enormous labour of love by linguists over the last decade, putting that material together, but in being able to now facilitate communities to access it where they need to, but also carry on all their other material activities in and around it, not being swamped by the linguistic data, but in fact being able to tap into it if they need to. So I think that we've tried to give you a bit of a taste of the website, to see what it can do, to see how you might be able to engage with it, and now I guess we throw it over to you, the audience, and ask you to comment and to maybe put questions. And I'm going to be upfront and tell you that anything technical, Anna and Bryn, okay, so don't ask me to give you anything technical at all, but I'm happy to sort of, answer other questions if I can. So back to you guys.
Okay. Thank you, Anna, Kevin, and Bryn, for this great introduction to the Endangered Language Project. Questions now. We don't have a lot of time, 5 minutes, so I will request all of you to be very brief while asking questions, and I will request the speakers to be very brief while responding as well, so that we can have at least 3 questions.
Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation of the project. I'd just like to raise 4 points. There are probably more points than questions, but it would be good to hear your opinion. The points are concerned with your interaction with other initiatives in the field. There are very many, of course, from UNESCO through Waterlog, Ethnolog, OLAC, and so on and so forth, in connection with the use of standards, for example. The second point is, what is the lifetime of the project likely to be? And what are the facilities for exporting information from the project? The third point is, what about copyright issues and restricted access to sensitive information? Because a lot of information from endangered languages is very sensitive for various reasons, from political to economic to religious and so on. And what about policy in regard to word lists, which typically, for example, contain names of body parts, for example, which would you censor these, for instance, especially if there are illustrations?
Great questions, thank you. Heaven, I'll let you handle the question of sensitive materials, yeah? As far as collaboration with other initiatives goes, we are highly interested in collaboration. We've done our best to get all of the other similar initiatives involved. So I think UNESCO, Glottolog, and OLAC are currently actively involved with actually, OLAC was in part developed by the Linguist List, which was one of the organizations which initially worked on ELPs. So if you go to the resources section of the website, we do include an OLAC search. UNESCO, we're actually planning meetings right now to work on more in-depth collaboration with them. And Glottolog, we have at least a mutual exchange of data right now and are looking at other ways to link in with them. So yeah, we're absolutely interested in having other initiatives as but sensitive information.
Sorry, I just cut out there a bit. It's Kevin here, and I just the questions around copyright and sensitivity, you know, are significant issues which were raised right at the very beginning of the project, and I guess the platform itself made it very difficult to place materials into the database and then have means by which you could block access. And you might have to help me on this one. My understanding was that there was some capacity for people to place material there, but to have access restricted. But by and large, the conversations have primarily been with communities not to place material up there that would either cause harm within the community or across communities. Because I guess of the indiscreet use of the internet, it's very difficult to ensure absolutely protection of material. So, because ELP did not start as a means of capturing everything about a community, all of the community-based materials and materials that the community itself are prepared to share. And so that's been the overarching sort of caveat which has directed people when they're considering whether or not to put materials up there or not. So if it's sensitive material, we've basically said to communities, this is maybe not the platform for you to put your material up, but more better to represent other activities that you're doing. It gives your language a presence on the website. It shows other things that you're doing. Those other issues which are clearly delineated by copyright or by social religious protections are better kept to another place where you can really lock down access to it. Does that answer the question, I hope?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Other questions?
I think Catherine asked about the lifetime of the project, which was also
yes.
About the is there any commitment by Google or another body for archival preservation of the resources?
Good question. Do you want to handle that?
Yeah, so all of the user-submitted content is hosted in other locations. So regardless of the survival of the project, those resources continue to exist. That's one way we've gotten around that issue. Regarding the information in the Endangered Languages catalog, we have that taken care of as well as being archived at a couple of different institutions. The lifetime of the project is a remaining question, and we actually have really good different ways we're involvement with the original institutions for LCAT, that University of Hawaii and Eastern Michigan University. Plus, we have our partnerships throughout the world with First Peoples Cultural Council, First Language of Australia, and a number of other organizations. Google is currently providing hosting services without cost. That's the only way that they're able to continue their involvement in the project. But we are working on a number of ways to ensure both that the website stays up and stays and that our material stays up to date and curated.
But the good news is we had a workshop last year about the sustainability of this project, and we've got a board of advisors, and it will be handed over to
Oh, lost you.
somebody about that. It would be, who's our president?
Bill Palmer?
Yes, Bill Palmer is our the president of our board of advisors going forward. So ask Bill.
Okay. Anything else? So I have a quick comment. So like you have this LEI, Language Endangerment Index. I think it will be good to also have something like DI or Documentation Index, because you have all the resources. You could say for each language what is the status of documentation, how much resources are available. Because often, I mean, you have 3,900 or some, but yeah, 3,300 languages there. But I'm sure the documentation amount of resources available would be very skewed across those.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. That's very astute. That was actually one of the things we'd hoped to incorporate into LCAT going forward is documentation in that exactly as described. For right now, we hope that users can use the bibliography page on each as a sort of approximation of what type of documentation is out there, but it's not as good as a real index. You're right. So we would love to do that. Thank you.
Okay, so let's thank them again, because you actually are across, I think, almost 2 dates and several time zones. And thanks for making it at such odd hours. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, and thank you for having us. And